Welcome to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rogers, VP of Business Development at KeyTech. Each month, me and a KeyTecher are going to interview a MedTech leader and talk to them about the critical data-driven decisions they make in their programs. Hey everybody, welcome back to MedTech Speed to Data. I'm your host, Andy Rogers. Here today we have Selena Shirkin, CEO of Fetal Therapy Technologies. Selena, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Yeah, it's always great to have a local company on the episode. So, Selena, your company spun out of Johns Hopkins. So for our audience, can you give just a background on who you are and kind of what inspired you to form this company?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. So I have a lot of background in biomedical engineering. I actually am from Baltimore, from the local area, and I did my bachelor's and my master's in biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins. And so the reason I pursued this was because in high school I was very fortunate to have some experience with entrepreneurship, some early exposure, and that kind of led me to be really passionate about startups and just entrepreneurship in general. So I knew that was something I wanted to pursue, but I was also really passionate and interested in STEM and science. And so I wanted a way to kind of blend these two together, and that's why I chose biomedical engineering. And specifically, I chose Hopkins. First of all, it's close to home, so that was a very easy choice. But also, I specifically chose Hopkins because of their design team program, which is kind of a biomedical engineering capstone project where teams of undergraduate students can partner with clinical mentors and clinical champions and solve a real-world clinical need or problem for them. And so the way our company got started was we were very fortunate. I led a team of biomedical engineers. We were paired up with the director of fetal surgery at Johns Hopkins. We just started from there, right? We learned all about what fetal surgery is, which if you're unfamiliar, it's kind of science fiction, but real life surgery done on a pregnant mother where the goal is to operate on the baby to repair a severe or life-threatening birth defect in utero. And we started learning about all the different challenges and problems in fetal surgery. And that's kind of how we started. It was a course project that we became really, really passionate about and spun out into a company. And so this is year 3 of working on this project. I'm actually very fortunate to be working on it full time now. My co-founder and I, we just graduated from our master's programs at Hopkins. And so this is like month 4 of working full time. So we're still very early stage, but that's a bit of background on me and the company, and happy to talk more.
Yeah, Selena, that's great, and I'm sure our audience is familiar with the senior design project or the master's degree kind of design project, and it's a great way to get real world experience while you're still getting your degree and trying to figure out what you want to do. So I guess just jumping right into it, I feel like you seem like you're very motivated in the space that you're in, and when you're starting a company, I feel like the mission is really important to get aligned and set that sort of vision for a couple of years out before just diving right into the product. So can you just describe what the mission is of your company and what you're trying to solve?
Yeah, definitely. Our mission is really to create devices that make fetal surgery safer. So for a little bit more context, when our team and I, when we first started shadowing fetal surgeries and talking to fetal surgeons across the US, we were really shocked. These procedures are life-saving and life-changing, but all of the devices we saw surgeons using were off-label, borrowed from other types of disciplines, borrowed from laparoscopic procedures or neurosurgery procedures. They just weren't indicated for use in the uterus or for fetal surgery. And there is also a really high complication rate in fetal surgery in general. It's risky. You don't want to be operating on a pregnant mother. And 40% of fetal surgeries have a risk of preterm birth. And so we kind of took our insights from the clinical shadowing of, these surgeons are using instruments not meant for these procedures. And we, as biomedical engineers, asked ourselves, what if we created those purpose-built instruments that actually make these procedures safer? So that's really our mission, is developing these purpose-built tools to improve the safety of these types of life-saving procedures. But fetal surgery on its own is a really hard field to be profitable in. So our technologies are really platform technologies that can be used across different types of disciplines, not only in fetal surgery, but maybe in more general cases like general OB-GYN or general interventional radiology, where our same technology and same mechanism of action can also make those kinds of procedures safer.
Yeah, it's a really smart move. I guess just following up on that is the idea that you would pursue a fetal surgical product first, but know that there's follow-on indications in maybe larger markets? Or is that kind of to be determined?
Yeah, it's kind of the reverse, actually. We would be starting with those larger applications or larger indications for use. And then eventually our company would solve that mission in fetal surgery. Because of the time to market and the cost to market, we would have to pursue those larger indications first and then pursue that fetal indication, leverage that data, existing data, to then build on that more higher risk, higher cost indication in fetal surgery. So in a way, our company becomes a company that solves two problems at once, right? One in a very general field where we're still solving a problem, but maybe it's not as high impact as something like fetal surgery, where we're solving the problem of these preterm birth complications and safety in that field.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm glad you corrected me. I think, yeah, you're going about it the right way. Can you just describe maybe the leading platform product that is in your pipeline, and just kind of where is it in the development cycle?
Like I mentioned, our mission is really to develop these purpose-built devices for fetal surgery and that become a platform for other microsurgical disciplines. So with that, our first product, it's a port system meant for safe access into the uterine environment. So all of these fetal surgical procedures are done in a minimally invasive fashion, or one of the ways to do it is minimally invasively, such like similar to laparoscopic surgeries. So that involves inserting a port through the abdomen into the uterus. And so we'd like to first make that device and allow that device to be a port system for safe access, such that surgeons can then insert all of their other instruments through that device and perform the surgery in a safer manner.
Mm.
But eventually, we'd love to be the company that also develops those other instruments that are inserted through the port system. Because again, that port system provides access into the uterus. You can't really do the procedure without that access. And so we're starting with that kind of flagship product and then creating the whole suite of instruments around it later down the line. But our first product would be that access port.
And so, just for our audience and what you're willing to share, like, how does the for lack of a better word, like the plumbing work here? Are you, opening, like, just describe the access from the abdomen to the fetus?
Yeah, happy to. So it's still patent pending right now, so I can't share too much, but really the port is designed to leverage the elastic properties of the uterine environment and really designed to make the entry a lot safer than the current clinical standard.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some room for innovation there. The port, it makes sense. You need to, kind of lay the railroad tracks right before you can, offer the other sort of instruments. Are you open to sharing, like, maybe the leading sort of tool or instruments that you're considering in your pipeline for the fetal surgeries?
Yeah, definitely. So, we're starting with the safe access port, but it would be wonderful to be able to create, a specialized fetal grasper or fetal suture. I know from our shadowing experiences, these instruments, they don't fit with one another. So when I was shadowing, I watched, a surgeon, he was using a grasper and a suture, and the suture was falling out of the grasper just because they didn't fit, right? And so that took time in the surgery to make sure that that didn't occur. When that did occur, they had to, re-grasp the suture, and that took a lot of operating time. So we'd be trying to develop those kind of more specialized instruments that are meant for operations on fetuses and on really small anatomy, and really working with fetal surgeons to make that happen. And I will say, just to answer the previous question, we're a very early stage company. So we, again, just graduated, just started working on this full time as our job for this year. And we've been primarily non-dilutive funded. So everything is grant-based and non-dilutive funding based. And really our main goal is this year is a big technical push and animal study in pig or sheep pregnant models.
I appreciate that background, Selena. Let's jump right into the kind of the meat of the podcast. The podcast is called Speed to Data. I like to interview the guests to understand, what data is critical that inspired them to kind of not take a job in your case and actually go and try this for real. And then, what data are you looking to collect, over the next year? You mentioned pig data. We'll talk more about it. And then into the future, what data or tools are essential for you. But I guess, like, what data were you looking for to convince yourself to pursue this endeavor? I mean, clearly you mentioned that you were interviewing surgeons, and seeing the challenges that they that they had and they presented to you. But I guess more from like a market sizing, like what data did you see to convince yourself that there is a real need here? There's a business case to be made.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when we first started, right, we were really interested in understanding the problems in the field. And so that meant doing a lot of customer discovery, not just with our clinical mentor at Johns Hopkins, but fetal surgeons across the US. So we were talking to as many people as we could just to understand the problems in the field and really do that needs finding. And for us, what was incredibly surprising, like I mentioned, we did a combination of, literature review and interviews with surgeons, but also shadowing. And we would go into these ORs and see the kind of tools that surgeons are using off label. And that was, as biomedical engineers, very surprising to us of, wow, this is such a complicated procedure. And surgeons don't have those purpose-built access devices or other types of surgical tools to perform these repairs. And in the 40 years that this field has existed, there really hasn't been,
Hmm.
you know, an FDA-approved technology aside from one, which is the Karl Storz fetoscope. It's a camera for visualization into these procedures. So in 40 years that this field has existed, that's the only FDA-approved
Right.
technology. I think that really drove us and that really surprised us and is what gave us that kind of activation energy we needed to try to innovate here. But then to your other part of the question of, the business landscape. For fetal surgery, right, it's incredibly hard to have a market or in a large market in this space. And so we went back to customer discovery again, and we started talking to a lot of other specialties and understanding how the mechanism of action of our device could be applied in all of these other disciplines and really how we could make ourselves a platform technology, not just in fetal surgery, but in microsurgery as a whole. And so I think doing that customer discovery and those interviews and that further analysis really helped lay the foundation for our company and how we could be, a company that creates a fetal innovation, but also reaches a much broader market of just general microsurgery and improves general microsurgery as a whole.
Yeah, yeah. So it seems like multiple data points were collected to kind of convince yourself that there's a clear fetal need, but the broader market could benefit from this as well. Let's talk about that animal study that you're pursuing. Is that for some investor milestone, or clearly you need to demonstrate the product, the prototype, the port will work. Just talk a little bit more about that animal study if you're open to sharing a little bit about it.
Yeah, definitely. So those are kind of tiers of data is first, as you mentioned, really examining how the current clinical standard devices cause damage. And we did that through looking at intrauterine videos of device insertion and really quantifying that mechanical damage of the current clinical standard. So we've shown that the clinical standard can definitely be improved. The second set of data that we're really looking to see is the mechanism of action of our device in our target tissue. So in fetal surgery, that would be
Mhm.
the fetal membranes or the placental membranes. And so we partnered with Johns Hopkins Pathology and we started running an experiment on placental membrane samples where we were examining the mechanism of action of our device compared to the current clinical standard to understand if our device can cause less damage than the current clinical standard in this tissue. And so our initial set of experiments have found that yes, there is evidence to show that the mechanism of action of our technology could reduce damage in fetal surgery. And then the next tier of data that we're really trying to collect would be that animal study, because the thing that's going to convince and sway clinical champions of using our product versus the current clinical standard would be, is it safe and effective? So we'd be looking at an animal study, either in a pregnant pygmy pig or a pregnant sheep, of our device compared to the current clinical standard of, inserting both of them into a pregnant model and just observing the outcome. We're really trying to tie use of our device to those clinical outcomes. That's kind of the next set of data that we would need before going into human trials with our technology.
Gotcha. So, just real quick on your development plan over the next year or so, are you doing your development under design controls, following design controls, or are you trying to just do it as lean and mean as possible to get this animal study, and then you would start, formal development? Just help our audience understand your strategy there.
Yeah, definitely. So again, as I mentioned, we're super early stage right now. Our product is a very minimum viable product prototype. So our biggest goals this year is to do a big technical push to really get that finalized device design that then we
Mm.
would be following all of those design controls. We keep a very detailed design journal already with justifications and design inputs and outputs. So we're doing our best as biomedical engineers of how we were trained to maintain those design controls. But really, our biggest focus right now is that technical push to get us to that initial animal data. So we're doing our best to follow those controls and practices, and while still being very lean about it, as we're still very
Yep.
early stage, non-dilutive grant funded startup.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about the future, speed to data. And clearly there's a clinical trial in the picture here. So have you thought at all or consulted with anyone on what that trial might look like and kind of what the success criteria would be? Just, again, to help our audience who might be developing similar type interventional devices get a sense for what that might look like.
Yeah, definitely. So for a fetal surgical trial, the success criteria are really safety and effectiveness when compared to the current clinical standard, which right now is an off-label use device. So really proving that our device design and our mechanism of action causes both less damage to the uterine environment, which is something we would be looking at, but also preterm birth complications, that we can prove that use of our device causes a decreased risk in preterm birth complications. That's for fetal surgery. But in terms of the other indications that we'd be pursuing, like I mentioned, we're probably going to be starting with a larger market, larger number of procedure, and larger procedural volume in order to eventually get to the fetal market. That path to market is going to look a little bit different, right? Because there we can probably qualify as a class 2 510K device and prove substantial equivalence to predicate devices, and then be able to have benchtop studies, maybe some preliminary animal studies before it could be approved for use. And
Right.
obviously there's reimbursement pieces that fall under there for the commercialization aspect. But really our path is going to look pretty different if we pursue those other indications first. And a clinical trial in those indications is also going to look pretty different, where it won't be tied as closely to safety outcomes because it's not as risky, it's not as high risk as fetal surgery, but it would be tied to maybe metrics like efficiency, also probably safety and damage to tissues, but less so as the fetal part would, because that's really the higher risk indication.
So just so I understand, so for the animal study next year, are you exploring the fetal application or the other more broader general application, or is that sort of like up in the air?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So with this approach, we're kind of doing these approaches in parallel, right? Like we do still need to do a pregnant pig study in the fetal application anyway. Regardless of what we do, surgeons are going to want to see, at least preliminary evidence in a pig or sheep model that this technology works the way it's supposed to and that it reduces damage and reduces risk. So we're doing that study this year. That's our biggest goal for this year is
Mm.
some sort of animal study in either a pig or sheep model. But at the same time that we're doing that and preparing that, we are also exploring, those other use cases and potentially doing that FDA benchtop level testing for that class 2 510K approval in those other indications. So it's kind of, again, a company exists to solve two problems at once. One of them is a lot
Mhm.
more impactful and high risk, that of fetal surgery. But we are pursuing both indications for use kind of in parallel.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, very, very ambitious, but I think that plan makes sense, right? You kind of want to, explore, what your passion and what your mission is about, the fetal studies, but then also, have like hedge the risk really with a more general application, and path to market, in a year's time when you're going to be looking to raise more money and you want a cleaner and clearer path to market, not a large trial that needs to be funded with a device that still needs development. So that's a good strategy, I think, having multiple options. And also, it helps with, suitors. Like I'm talking about like strategics, just getting their interest, and then also from investors to that are looking for less risky bets, particularly these days. Awesome. All right. Well, let's pivot over to our lightning round, the end of the episode here. So, a couple quick questions for you, Selena. And again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Always great to have a local on the episode. So, let's talk a little bit about what you've learned about raising money. You mentioned non-dilutive funding a few times now. Can you just answer like where is your funding coming from, and what advice do you have to the audience?
Yeah, definitely. So, like I mentioned, a lot of our funding comes from grants. I was a student about 4 months ago, and so my biggest advice is for other young founders or student founders. There are so many opportunities that we can take advantage of. There's a lot of collegiate level pitch competitions, business plan competitions that we've been very successful at and have been able to raise a little bit of non-dilutive funds that way to get us started with prototyping and, publication expenses and patent fees. But then there are also, state level grants. Like I'm local to Maryland. I'm from Baltimore. And so we've been able to take advantage of, opportunities that TEDCO offers. So for example, we just received the Baltimore Innovation Initiative grant opportunity from TEDCO, and TEDCO has been a huge resource to student entrepreneurs in Baltimore, also with their inaugural Pavel Lapierre Innovation Award that honors Pavel Lapierre, who is a huge instrumental force in the Baltimore innovation community and for student entrepreneurship. So TEDCO has been a wonderful resource that I, as a previous student founder, could draw on. And those opportunities have enabled us to go full time on the venture for this year. We've also gotten opportunities from Hopkins itself, from Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures. We're supported by the Presidential Venture Fellowship from Johns Hopkins, which is also a pretty sizable grant opportunity we were able to take advantage of. So again, I can talk a lot about non-dilutive funding. We haven't taken any VC capital yet. And so we're trying to understand when we would need to start raising VC funds, probably in the near future once this grant funding runs out. We've also applied to the SBIR opportunity at the NIH. And so we're just waiting to hear back as well.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, you're following a tried and true formula, which is like an affiliation with a university, pursuing the non-dilutive funding, and then, sort of increasing in size as you're able to mature your product. And, SBIR would be next, and outside of like the regional funding. And I'm sure you're looking at things like, I don't know, ARPA, maybe, other like ARPA H, like larger amounts of non-dilutive funding that are out there. That are constantly evolving. I'm not saying it's like an easy thing to do by any means, but I know other guests we've had on the podcast are, they're affiliated with the university, and that really helps them work that network to get the larger funds that they need. All right, so another question, if I may. I know you're a couple months out of school, but can you just talk a little bit about maybe your plans for building a development team at such a small size? I understand it's you and maybe a co-founder, is that right? But can you just talk a little bit about your current team and thoughts on building a team?
Yeah, definitely. So, when I was in design team at Hopkins, I had the opportunity to be able to recruit a whole team. And that was a really awesome process where I actually got to interview and build a team, not only of people who are really qualified, but also people who could collaborate with each other. And so to test that, I put everyone, I put groups of people in a room together, and I just observed how they interacted with one another. And, did this person talk over people? Did they actually listen and contribute? And were they able to just have a conversation? So that was one of the strategies I employed when I was actually building my team. But yes, as you mentioned, right now, our full-time team is myself. I'm the CEO and my CTO co-founder. And in terms of developing that team further, we've got a chief medical officer that we'd like to bring on board as we raise further funds. We also are supported by a very broad variety of clinical, technical, and business mentors across the Johns Hopkins ecosystem and beyond. So we work incredibly closely with the Johns Hopkins Center for Fetal Therapy. We also have a lot of other connections to fetal surgeons across the U.S. And we also have a lot of support from technical experts and machinists in the local Baltimore community. And we're partnering with some other companies outside of Baltimore and Maryland to help manufacture our products. So really, my co-founder and I are leaning on our strengths, and then where needed, we contract out and rely on the support of mentors or other community members to help get us connected. But yes, definitely, as we raise more funding, we would increase the full-time staff we have.
Yeah, I mean, another like buzzword that I don't know. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. The fractional like hire is like very much on trend and very practical. I feel like if you're starting a small company, I know you mentioned like a chief medical officer, maybe maybe you're already planning to have a fractional one, but like fractional chief, commercial strategist and things like that, where, you can hire them to, they're on your team, you can represent that they're on your team to investors, but they're not really, a large burn rate, but they're bringing to you like commercial plans, right? So things that you don't have experience with that they do that helps round out, where your company's going. So I'm a big fan of the fractional buzzword and usage for teams like yours. And so it sounds like you've been putting some good thought into that. And so, Selena, I want to just end it right there. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And again, great to have a Hopkins alum, and I'm a Hopkins alum as well, on the podcast. And wish you all the best. With fetal therapy technologies, we'll keep an eye on you here over the next year or two, and maybe have you back on as you mature your company.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you so much for having me, Andy. It was so great to talk with you and about our company. So thank you.
All right. Until next time, everyone, I'm Andy Rogers from MedTech Speed to Data. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. Join us each month for more ways to get the right data faster to inform critical decisions. Find additional resources on our website, keytechinc.com. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and please leave a review on iTunes whenever you listen. Thanks.